Picture the scene. A lone rider pushes through a set of swinging batwing doors and steps into a saloon. The piano player stops, the room goes quiet, and all eyes turn to the stranger. This is the Wild West saloon we all know from the movies, a place of adventure and heroic gunfights. But what if I told you almost everything about that image is wrong? The reality was a far grittier, grimier affair, less about showdowns and more about an overwhelming, inescapable filth. Today, we're peeling back the layers of Hollywood romance to reveal the shocking truth about Wild West saloons. And trust me, they were dirtier than you can imagine. If you enjoy uncovering the real history of the Old West, do me a favor and hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the notification bell so you never miss an exploration into the past. Now, let's step through those swinging doors into the real thing. Number 1, the building itself. First, forget the grand wooden buildings from the movies. The very first saloons were nothing more than temporary structures. In a new mining camp or railroad town, the saloon was often the first business to pop up, sometimes as just a crude tent, a sod house, or a shack built from whatever scrap was lying around. As a town grew, these would give way to simple wooden buildings, often with a false front to make it look bigger than it was. It was an attempt to project stability in an unstable world. Only in the most successful towns like Deadwood or Tombstone would you find the truly elaborate saloons. But the most immediate thing you'd notice upon entering was the smell. It was a thick, foul cocktail of stale beer, cheap whiskey, unwashed bodies, and thick tobacco smoke. Every time the door opened, a fresh wave of dust and manure from the unpaved street blew in. The sounds were different, too. Music was a luxury. The main sounds were the low murmur of conversations, punctuated by the hacking coughs of sick men. Visually, the place was just grimy. The floors were rough wood, covered in a layer of sawdust to absorb spills and tobacco spit, creating a perpetually damp and dirty surface. The bar itself was sticky, and the whole place was dimly lit by smoky kerosene lamps. Even the iconic batwing doors weren't for dramatic entrances, they were for ventilation. Number 2, a hotbed for sickness. The Wild West saloon was dirty in the most literal sense, turning these crowded places into breeding grounds for deadly diseases. The threats inside a saloon were often invisible and far more dangerous than any gunfight. For the average person on the frontier, bathing was a huge and infrequent chore. Water had to be hauled by hand and heated over a fire. In a typical family, everyone would wash in the same small tub of water, starting with the father and ending with the youngest child. By the end, the water was cold and filthy. Dental hygiene was just as bad. People often used a knife to pick food from their teeth. If a tooth got infected, the local barber or blacksmith would pull it out with pliers and a shot of whiskey for the pain. The towns themselves were just as unsanitary. There were no sewer systems, and waste was simply dumped outside of town. This filth was constantly tracked into the crowded saloon. This environment was a paradise for pests like lice, flies, and roaches. This perfect storm of poor hygiene, no sanitation, and pests made the saloon an incredibly efficient place for disease to spread. Cholera could rip through a saloon from shared, unwashed glasses. Tuberculosis spread easily in the closed, smoky rooms. Smallpox, another highly contagious virus, would have also spread like wildfire. In reality, you were far more likely to die from a disease you caught in a saloon than from a bullet. Number 3, the whiskey was poison. Beyond the physical and biological filth, another kind of dirt flowed freely: the liquor itself. The whiskey that cowboys drank was rarely smooth, aged bourbon. More often, it was a disgusting and dangerous concoction known by names like coffin varnish, tarantula juice, or rot gut. True, aged whiskey was a rare luxury. To meet the demand for cheap liquor, saloon keepers created fake spirits. The base was usually cheap, raw grain alcohol. To turn this into whiskey, they added burnt sugar for color and a plug of chewing tobacco to give it a kick with a dose of nicotine. But the most alarming ingredients were poisonous chemicals. Recipes for fake bourbon called for additives like turpentine and creosote, a wood preservative. The final product was a harsh liquid that could make a person violently ill. The name rot gut was a literal description of its effects. This wasn't just a few bad apples. It was a widespread industry with almost no government regulation. Even the beer was a disappointment. Without refrigeration, it was served at room temperature, often flat and stale. And just like whiskey, it was sometimes doctored with narcotics to make it seem stronger. Number 4. Vice and violence weren't like the movies. The saloon's reputation as a den of vice was earned, but the reality was far less glamorous than what we see on screen. First, the classic bar brawl, the massive, chaotic free-for-all, is almost entirely a movie invention. Real saloon violence was sporadic, personal, and much more lethal. It was typically a quick, brutal, and deadly encounter between 2 or 3 men over a gambling dispute or an insult. Recognizing this danger, many towns made patrons check their firearms at the door. This simple form of gun control ensured that most disputes were settled with fists, not bullets. Gambling was the main entertainment. There were respected square dealers who built a reputation for honesty, and there were traveling card sharps who preyed on newcomers with marked cards and other tricks. The role of women is also misunderstood. A distinction existed between saloon girls and prostitutes. Saloon girls were entertainers. Their job was to sing, dance, and talk with lonely patrons to keep them buying drinks. For many women, this was a path to financial independence. Prostitution was a separate and much more dangerous line of work. Number 5. Not everyone was welcome. Contrary to the image of a lawless free-for-all, the saloon was a highly structured environment with rigid, unwritten rules and stark lines of exclusion. The saloon was the social center of the white male frontier. It was where cowboys, miners, lawmen, and outlaws could all cross paths. The line between a lawman and an outlaw was often surprisingly thin. However, this melting pot had firm boundaries. A respectable woman would never set foot in a saloon. Racial exclusion was also the rule. Native Americans and Chinese immigrants were not welcome. While black men were a significant part of the West, they were also generally barred from white-owned saloons and established their own. One surprising excluded group was the U.S. Army soldier. Many saloon patrons had a natural disdain for the uniform and the authority it represented. Within the accepted group of patrons, behavior was governed by a strict code. Privacy was critical. You never asked a man personal questions about his past, and a powerful custom was the obligation to buy a round of drinks. Refusing a drink offered to you was a terrible insult. The romanticized saloon of Hollywood is a fiction. The historical truth is that the real saloon was a raw, filthy, and foul-smelling hub of disease. It served poisonous liquor to a select clientele governed by rigid social codes. This grimy reality, however, is a much more accurate and powerful symbol of the American West than the myth that has replaced it. It reveals a world not of simple heroes, but of real people struggling to survive in a harsh world. What part of the real Wild West saloon surprised you the most? The poisonous whiskey, the rampant diseases, or the strict social rules? Let us know in the comments below. Thanks for watching.